Revolution knows no compromise. Revolution overturns and destroys everything that gets in its way.
You are watching Breakthrough News, and this Freedom Side. I'm one of your hosts, Eugene Puryear, here as always, alongside my intrepid co-host, Rania Khalek. Rania, as always, great to be back alongside you.
It's always a pleasure to be alongside you, Eugene.
Well, I'll have to tell you, the pleasure is in fact all mine, but nonetheless, glad that you enjoy it. Here we are once again, great show for you, going all around the world as we always do. I would also like to, as I always do, take the time right now for those of you who are watching on YouTube to remind you, if you haven't already subscribed, become a subscriber, now would be a great time for you to go ahead and hit the subscribe button, then hit the bell so that you get the alerts for the things that you subscribe to, so that way you don't have to look very far or very hard for all of the great new content coming out on a regular basis from Breakthrough News, including dispatches with Rania Khalek. And of course, if you are watching on Free Speech TV, you don't have to do anything, just keep watching. And as always, big shout out to the Free Speech TV team for making it possible for us to appear to you there. Rania, are there other things you would like to alert our viewers to?
Yes, there are, Eugene. So I want to remind everybody to like, subscribe, and share. Especially make sure you smash that like button. It helps boost us in the algorithm. But also, if you appreciate our content here at Breakthrough News, and if you are somebody who genuinely understands the importance of independent media in these dark, dark times, you can actually help support Breakthrough News materially, financially, by becoming a member of Breakthrough News at patreon.com/Breakthrough News. Become a member for as little as $5 a month, though please, there is no cap on how much you can give. And you can help support my show Dispatches, this program, this live stream program we do every single week, The Freedom Side, all of our other great programming like the Socialist Program with Brian Becker, the China Report with Amanda Yee, and lots more cool stuff to come. You can access exclusive content. You can also access exclusive merch by becoming a member, like this very cool mug, which I love. I love this mug so much. Taking a sip there. And I'm narrating, everybody. But no, I think it's, you don't have, not everybody can do independent media, but you can support it. So I think our outlet's quite special. So please support Breakthrough News by going to patreon.com/Breakthrough News. You can also make a one-time donation if you want by going to breakthroughnews.org or in the live chat tonight as we move on here, Eugene.
Yes, no, absolutely. And we're going to get ready to move on. And some breaking news, or not breaking news, but just updated news for people who haven't been following. I'm sure they saw the terrible, tragic loss of life there in Washington, D.C.'s National Airport, a regional jetliner colliding with a helicopter. Now it's being reported that, unfortunately, authorities believe all 64 people aboard the American Airlines jet have perished. We can swing back around and talk more about this afterwards, Rania, but I just wanted to mention that only 28 bodies have been found, but it seems there's very little hope that anyone made it, unfortunately, there in the midair crash. So more to talk about there, but just for those who have been following that news, wanted to update it as we move on into the show. Obviously, there are a lot of different things we're going to talk about now, so this would also be a great time for you to let everybody know who knows you somehow, some way, that we are about to get underway with this show, whether you want to knock on someone's door, shoot them a text, give them a call, honk your horn. Actually, don't do anything if you're driving. I don't even know why you're watching this if you're driving. But maybe when you get out of the car, let people know we are here, carrier pigeon, whatever makes sense. But we want to jump right into our first story. As many people saw in the ongoing aftermath of the ceasefire in Gaza, many Gazans have been returning to their homes in the northern part of Gaza. A lot of images are coming out. We are very, very honored to be joined here on the show once again by Abubaker Abed, who is a Palestinian journalist and commentator in Gaza. Abubaker, thanks so much for being back with us.
Yeah, you're so welcome. Hello. And I'm sure the internet now is good for this time.
You're crystal clear. It's actually fantastic. Excellent. Well, Let me ask you this. Give us maybe a sense of maybe the general scene here now, several days after the ceasefire, but also, I saw some of the images you were able to share on social media of what looked like a very amazing moment of many tens of thousands of people returning to their homes in northern Gaza, which they had been told they would never return to. Seems like there was a lot of emotion, a lot of interesting stories. So maybe just give us a sense of some of those on-the-ground events.
Yeah, as you said, like everyone was literally happy about that because they could never ever imagine it at all. And what they have been through over the past 14 months is absolutely unimaginable. This population has been going through starvation, has been going through a lot in the freezing temperatures, has been displaced in uninhabitable shelters and dilapidated tents. They had no means of life at all. But now, given the fact that they are getting back to northern Gaza, is just a sense of jubilation, a big source of relief and reprieve that is flooding through every one of them, particularly for children, given the fact that the Gaza population, half of it is children. This is their time, children's time to enjoy and relish this moment, this historic moment. And also, we really want to say that for them, that those people have really refused all the plans, have really rejected all the Israelis' plans over the course of the genocide, and they have really stuck together and got united every time during every sort of juncture. It's a very huge and powerful proof of what the Palestinian unity is like and what the spirit of the Palestinians is like. So they are really returning with that sense of jubilation, with that sense of elation, and we could see even people really in tears, children, mothers, families getting together again after Israel separated them very deliberately and brutally during this time. And what was really heartbreaking is that people are returning to absolutely nothing, with absolutely nothing, and they are absolutely devoid. Like northern Gaza is devoid of every life means. People are now struggling in northern Gaza because their homes have been destroyed, their neighborhoods have been razed to the ground, and there is nothing, there is absolutely nothing. So they are just restarting this cycle of horror one more time again. So they are displaced even above the rubble of their houses. They are still displaced. They are taking shelter in their tents because Israel is still blocking containers, caravans, and proper dwellings from entering or getting into Gaza, which is an act of genocide, an act of extreme brutality and barbarism. But this is still going, and for them and for every Palestinian, the victory is that we've stayed on this land, and we've stuck together, and we defied all the odds. And this defiance is the biggest sign of what victory looks like, because the entirety, all of us really, are innocent and don't have any weapons at all. We're not a party to this war, but because Israel is a really terrorist and apartheid regime, it's targeting civilians, children, women, and men who don't have any part in this war. But yes, we continue to hope, we continue to defy the odds, and we continue to stick together and be together until we rebuild Gaza. And again, this is just the first step that will usher in the liberation of the entire occupied Palestinian territories.
Rania, you're muted.
I'm so sorry about that. Abubaker, I'm so happy to hear you so clearly, and your reports from Gaza have been so important to follow. And you were talking a bit about the struggle of people's homes and the destruction and kind of, seeing the rubble. I'm also curious if you can paint us a picture of the humanitarian situation in the North, because for so long, the North was completely cut off from the rest of the Strip. They were trying to starve people out of the North. And that's, I think, where, the least amount of aid was getting into. Also, the bombing was so vicious. I imagine that there's probably bodies that are being pulled from the rubble. There was also, I've seen people tweeting about decomposed bodies and bones. I've also seen some videos of people. There was one in particular, you may have seen it as well. Maybe you've met people under these circumstances who have children with them whose parents had been killed, and so they've taken them on as their own children because there's now so many orphans in Gaza. So I'm just curious, in your travels and talking to people, what have you been seeing in terms of that humanitarian situation and just the situation for children who've, gotten either disconnected from their families or lost from their families, and also the number of bodies being pulled out from the rubble?
Well, like Rania, for families who are returning home, they really want to reunite with the other parts of families, whether dead or alive. A lot of people here who have come back to northern Gaza are or have united with their families who have been killed by the Israeli military over the course of this genocide. But at least they have seen them, they have really mourned their death, and that's what they really want. For the vast majority of people, this is their story. And this is apart from the fact that there are still thousands of bodies still rubble. And when we talk about this, I've been talking to people from different parts of the Gaza Strip, particularly around the Netzarim corridor, this corridor that people have been talking about for a very, very long time, and Israel has been pondering over. This corridor had dozens, you're talking about tens and hundreds of bodies around this corridor that have been covered from under the rubble. And they were not intact corpses, they were just skulls and bones, and those bodies were decomposing. And I saw one of the young men returning to Gaza, particularly in Tel Hawa neighborhood, and he just found the lower jaw of his sister, and he just took this completely decomposed jaw and just buried it into one of the nearby graveyards. So this is the barbarity and brutality of what Israel is about, of course. And for the humanitarian situation, people are now repeating the same scenario. It's just about walking kilometers to get a sip of water or a bite of food, and the demands there are so huge that people, that what is available cannot really meet their needs at all. We talk about now more than 500,000 people have arrived in northern Gaza. Absolutely, they have arrived in completely devastated neighborhoods and residential buildings, and all life means have been deliberately decimated by Israel. The streets, the water infrastructure, and all buildings, all necessities and necessary buildings that can serve this population have been totally taken out of service in Gaza. What people are looking for right now is to rebuild what the devastation that has been inflicted upon their houses and their neighborhoods. But unfortunately, we go back to the same reason that Israel is purposefully denying the access to those proper shelters and dwellings, and denying the access to medications, to food staples and all of these basic necessities. This is what Israel is doing, and this is an outright violation of the ceasefire. And during the night hours, what we've been hearing over the course of the past days is constant buzzing by Israeli drones. And this is another breach of what the ceasefire was, how the ceasefire was agreed upon. And this continues, like what people can do. Gaza needs many years, tens of years, until it really stands on its feet again. So who will rebuild Gaza? We need humanitarian efforts, we need international efforts. But until now, Israel is still debating and negotiating over the second phase. So the problem is coming out or emanating from either side. They don't come from the Hamas side, they come from the Israeli side. But for people, they're still, are resilient, they're still steadfast, they want to live anything. In the end, they have just completely tackled and refused this plan to be ethnically cleansed or exterminated. They're back to where they belong, to the places they were born in, raised in, and for them, this is victory, and for them, this is what they want and what they have been desiring for a very, very long time. And so a moment they never imagined that it would be possible, but their hope and their unity and their togetherness. For people, the humanitarian situation is still writing, but there are hope that something can be done.
No, I think that's a really important point, and certainly the level of steadfastness is so clear. I mean, and maybe I even can already maybe guess the answer to this question, but how, if at all, are people reacting, responding to the statements that were made by President Trump of wanting to quote unquote clean out Gaza and essentially doubling down on the idea that the Palestinians should be forced out and into the Sinai?
Well, I'm not really sure if Trump even cleans his room very well while he talks about what Gaza is looking like at the moment. And I think all of what they have been saying, these presidents, these corrupt West, everywhere, all of this nonsense, you're not really hear people like this who have all types of torture and all sorts of death over the course of time. You cannot really defeat someone who has lost their entire family, who has really lost their home, their buildings, their work, and everything. You cannot really defeat them. They are still saying that even if the war, I'm hearing from people here, even if the war is resumed, we are going to stay resilient. We're going to stay steadfast, and we are not going to surrender at all. And this is one of the main reasons that Gaza is named the graveyard of the invaders. So there is no wonder and there is no surprise that is called or named like this. And for us, even for the younger generations, what people are reacting to Trump is that we are not going, whatever he wants to do, we're staying here, we are going to endure, and we will continue to endure no matter what happens, because Gaza is planted in our hearts, and our hearts are planted in Gaza. And you cannot really separate this or even dismantle this unbelievable connection. People, when they came back to their houses and to their neighborhoods, they really, really, really kissed the land, the soil there. And this has happened in different parts of the Strip and Rafah. People want to live in completely demolished houses, in completely demolished neighborhoods, no matter what, but it's still home for them. The rubble of their houses is still home for them. And tell me, like, if you have any idea, if any president around the world, if any corrupt president, any terrorist president around the world who is still fighting the Gazan people, like, you have tried for 14 months. And by the way, we will not attacked by Israel only. We were attacked by the unity, by the entire European Union and some Arab countries, if not all of them, and almost the entire world. Let me say, almost the entire world has been attacking and exterminating and funding and financing the genocide in Gaza. Tell me, what have they achieved on the ground except destroying civilians' houses, killing the children and women, immolating innocent people, and just completely decimating the healthcare sector and all life needs? Except that they haven't done anything. In the end, after 14 months, the people have returned to their houses, and Israel has been plunged into the area where it was obliged to negotiate over the hostage. So how can you really beat us? This is the question.
Well said. I think that's a very, very well taken point. Sorry, Rania, I didn't know if you were about to jump in.
Yeah, Abubaker, I wanted to ask you, obviously you've been covering this horrific genocide, but you've also been experiencing it. You've watched so many of your friends and colleagues be murdered by the Israelis over the last 15 months. I'm curious if you could maybe tell us your own feelings. I mean, you've told us a lot about the people of Gaza, but your own feelings about everything that's happened since the ceasefire went into effect.
I am honestly, Rania, I am hopeful. I am happy, of course, but I will not rest until Palestine is free, because I'm still a refugee in Dir al-Balah. Okay, it's a refugee camp. It's where I was born. It's where I was raised. But I want to go back to Beit Ras, the hometown that my grandparents were expelled from. And I will not rest until that. I want to sacrifice my life for it. I'm going to do everything for it. That's why younger generations must really do everything. And again, both of you know, everyone who knows Abubaker knows that Abubaker was a football reporter, but he was evolved into more of a war correspondent just for his homeland. And that's what I need to do. So again, I will not leave it at all. And for the ceasefire, I'm really happy that the Israeli genocide has stopped, that this bloodbath has stopped, because it's really important. Look, I'm looking at the hospital right now. The hospital is literally empty from war-wounded people, from corpses, from tears, from blood. And the ground is very, very clean, not like the other 14 months where people were relentlessly killed in mass slaughter. This is a very significant thing for people. They are now having the time and having the chance to heal up their wounds and to just relax and forget about the pain and grief, their unbearable losses. And for me personally, my aunt's family was wiped out and need really to go to my aunt whom I haven't seen at all during this war, and I haven't consoled her at all. So I really need to go to her and reconsole her and hug her, because this is really important for me and for my very dearest friend who was killed during this war, although he didn't have any political affiliations. He was not a part of this war. I haven't seen his grave. I really want to go there and cry and just have that sort of catharsis and vent all the pain that are really concealed over the course of this genocide. That's why the importance of this ceasefire from here, it really comes. And this is not for only for me, for many people, for thousands of people, for everyone. Like everyone in Gaza has a big tragedy to tell, and their tragedies have been compounded every single day during the last 14 months. For them, now is the time to really rehabilitate and to recover from what has been inflicted upon them for every single day during this genocide. For me, for my family, for everyone, now is the time to relive again, to restore humanity that we've been stripped of, because the world has allowed that. The world could not stop Israel from the beginning. Israel was deliberately rejecting the ceasefire deal from the start. This death toll, huge death toll, could have been escaped if Israel really had agreed to the ceasefire deal proposal put on the table by the mediators a long time ago. But yes, because people have to understand, people don't need to forget and to forgive what Israel has done, because everyone who's gonna forget or forgive Israel for what it has done during the past 14 months is gonna be as demonic, as really barbaric and monstrous as what Israel is about. So it's really important for us and for me and for everyone in Gaza that we really don't want to get back to the level that we were before October the 7th, because life before October the 7th was also bad, but because we really went through what is unimaginable, we are really desperate and yearning for what was before October the 7th. But we are now in time and in a stage where no life means can be found at all. We are not even we're not even in the stage that before October the 7th. We're even much lower than that. But we want to rebuild. We want to make sure that we have the freedom, we have the dignity, the tranquility, and all human rights as any other humans around the world. And this is a responsibility that should be put on the shoulders of humanitarian organizations, because again, I believe that they have been a very dark reason to our suffering alongside the Israelis. And this must be done in the way we see. No one should decide what our future should be like. We decide our future. We decide how Gaza must be like. We are the people, the rightful owners of this land, and we will decide it. We'll continue to fight back against this occupation until we really dismantle it. And that can only be erased by the continued resistance and the armed resistance. Other than that, international laws, etc., all this blah cannot really do anything, because we've been pleading for people and pleading for the international humanitarian organizations and the human rights organizations, but all of them have turned out to be in the end just mere facades that serve their own interests and specific categories of this world. So we will continue to hope, we will continue to stick together with the good people and the noble people of the world, like you and like other people around the world who have stood by Palestine over the course of this genocide and before, until we really live and visit Palestine.
Mm-hmm. Well, as always, Abubaker Abed, Palestinian journalist and commentator based in Gaza, thank you so much for some of your time here on the Freedom Side.
So welcome. Really happy. Bye-bye.
Wow. I mean, that is like so heartwarming to see just how joyful he is. After, I mean, like, we watched basically him survive a live stream genocide, and to hear him say that he plans to return to his village is just beautiful. It's just beautiful, and it warms my heart. And I think watching those images of people return to northern Gaza just a few days ago, it's so iconic. It was so epic. And, you know, I never want to forget that image. I never want to forget that image, because it just shows that no matter what Israel does, they just can't. They can't exterminate Palestine, and they won't.
Indeed. Indeed. Well, let's move on to our next topic here, talking about some of the ructions and currents in the politics of the First World, Global North, whatever you want to call it, America, Europe, Canada. I guess it includes Australia and some other ones too. Either way, to illuminate all of this, we are very, very happy to be joined here by Vijay Prashad, Executive Director of the Tricontinental Institute for Social Research. As always, Vijay, thanks so much for being with us.
It's great to follow Abubaker, and I quite agree that he is such a delightful person, so representative of the incurable hope, as Mahmoud Darwish said, incurable hope of the Palestinian experience.
An amazing phrase, actually. Wow, there's so much I could say, but let's stay on the topic here. Recently at Tricontinental, you all put out a great dossier, The False Concept of Populism and the Challenges Facing the Left, a conjunctural analysis of politics in the North Atlantic. I think a real good compass, if you will, to help navigate where we are in the U.S., Europe, other places. And, Trump is back. Trump is the president. He's been elected. As you know, Vijay, the U.S. political discourse is, this sort of populism as a very bad thing. It's sort of negative to really challenge the sort of establishment and the status quo. And it's, in a way, I'm curious if this is not to say Trump is good, but to what degree does the fact that sort of on the right and the left, there's more of a challenge to the neoliberal status quo, what does that say about where the world is, now in 2025, a quarter of the way into this new century?
Well, it's a great way to put this question, and you're experiencing Trump in real time. I mean, some people said the other day when he decided to freeze federal funds that it was a coup d'etat. In fact, it's interesting, and I think that's a good place to start, because what this far right of a special type, that's what we call it. We stay away from more inflammatory terms like fascism, because in a way the term fascism closes the conversation, and then you just have to fight them. You don't need to understand them. But this far right of a special type is quite interesting, because unlike the fascists, they understand that the system within state institutions enables them to go as far as they can. They are going to use the state institutions as far as they can go. If it's legal to fire people, they're going to fire people. If it's legal to stop money going to organizations whose ideas they don't like, they're going to do it. If you take them to court, go ahead. And they challenge the weak-kneed neoliberals to take them to court. And of course, the neoliberals don't. I watched part of the hearing where Robert Kennedy was being grilled by the Democrats. I thought, Robert Kennedy is an own goal. You don't have to try very hard to show that this guy has some pretty nutty ideas, yeah? But here they were, basically fumbling their way through Robert Kennedy's hearing. I was surprised to see Bernie Sanders wasting his time with pictures of onesies on the screen, saying, are you selling these onesies? Or what's her name from Massachusetts, Elizabeth Warren, going on and on about how, asking Mr. Kennedy, are you going to benefit from your job? When there's so many other things you could ask them about how they use power to the limit and constrain the freedom of people. So what the far right of a new type is doing, rather than shaking up neoliberalism is that they're using whatever authoritarian instruments the neoliberal period has bequeathed them, and it's bequeathed them a lot, to basically go after people, to go after migrants and so on, to rile up the population, but not challenge the structures of neoliberalism. And that's, I think, where the conventional center-left and the liberals miss the point. They want to see these people as cut from a different cloth, fascists, populists, whatever. In fact, these are neoliberals who are actually able to rile up the population on other issues, on issues such as immigration. But where has Mr. Trump actually gone after the structures of neoliberalism? You know, he's not coming in and saying, let's rebuild the social welfare state. It's not on the agenda for him. It's not even there, not even helping his own so-called constituency, what he claims is his constituency. So that's really what we were trying to nudge, you know, that in fact these people are not rattling the neoliberal cage, which of course the left would like to see happen.
You know, speaking of the left, I want to ask you a question about the best response to this. But Vijay, something that is so upsetting about this fake populism is the way it's actually worked on some people. Not everybody. I don't want to say everybody or even a majority of people, but a significant enough chunk of the population of average people have bought into the idea that like Trump, someone like Trump freezing federal funding, which ends up cutting off Medicaid for a bunch of people, is somehow sticking it to the man. You know, basically, like they've done a good job conning a big enough chunk of the population into believing that despite the fact that they're just pulling more money out of everybody else and pushing it up to the top, that they're actually messing with the system and hitting back at like the big guy. So I guess all that's to say, how is the left supposed to fight back against that? Because one of the biggest issues we have is billionaires are running the media. Right? Like the vast majority of media outlets are owned by really, really wealthy people who push this narrative that the far right is populist, when it's just not true. So how are we supposed to challenge that effectively when we're up against so much?
Well, the first thing to bear in mind is across Europe and the United States, the largest constituency in any of these countries, the increasingly largest constituency, are people who no longer vote or who vote without any interest or who basically don't really care about the political system at all. They may vote with some interest, but they don't have any faith in the political system. The largest constituency has given up on the politics of their countries. I think that's the first thing to bear in mind. If you want to understand where the people are, they are actually not the people at the Trump rally. They are sitting at home going, there's no hope for us. And somehow you have to rekindle hope for them. The second thing is that these political and electoral systems are really rigged against the poor. You know, in many of these countries, we found voting day is not a holiday. Voting centers are far from where people work. There is a lot of class voter suppression. People can't get the day off. They don't have the means to take buses during the lunch break to go and line up for hours on end and so on. This is a class suppression of the mandate. And I think this is very rarely talked about. You know, there is, I think, the important conversation about race-based suppression, you know, the suppression of the black vote in Ohio and so on. But it's not just the black vote, it's the working class vote. It's people who are at their minimum wage, precarious jobs. They just don't have the means to get to the ballot. A very large number of people have been utterly disenfranchised in this system. Now, it's also true that there is some excitement when you hear, say, somebody like Mr. Trump come out there and say a bunch of outrageous things. You know, but then also it's rather disturbing. A plane goes down, hits a helicopter in Washington, D.C., and Mr. Trump blames minorities. I mean, there's nothing exciting about that. I don't see millions of people darting to the streets with signs saying, get rid of minorities from the air traffic control and so on. You know, I don't think these are quote unquote popular sentiments, but these will be sentiments that Elon Musk and others will transmit through their very large megaphones. It's important to bear in mind when somebody like Elon Musk says that, we need to get people out who have a different culture, get them out of the United States. He was born in South Africa. He was born under apartheid culture. I suppose he would feel quite happy in the Jim Crow South, but I'm very much hopeful that the United States has gone past the Jim Crow experience at that depth, at least, and perhaps his South African apartheid experience doesn't qualify him to talk about other people's culture being welcomed or not in the United States. But he gets to shape what the news is. People like him, people like Bezos and others, they own big newspapers, the Murdoch family. So I think they have silenced the very large, to quote from Richard Nixon's silent majority, who don't have the ability to build a political life in the global north. We find that not only in the United States, but across Europe, the sentiment among the majority of the people that, man, I just don't have a political life any longer. I'm just trying to survive. I'm hustling to survive. I don't have a political experience. I think that's really where the attention should be paid, not to things like populism, which anyway was a concept born in the United States to disparage the agrarian rebellions of the 19th century, which rose up to stand with farmers against bankers and so on. That was a term of disparagement in the 19th century. And now it's used by liberals as a way to disparage the far right of a special type because they don't have an argument against them. They're not able to argue against them on the substantial issues. Who speaks for the worker who can't get to the polling booth? Certainly not the Democrats and definitely not the Republicans.
Well, real quick before we let you go, you quoted Richard Nixon, so I'll raise you one here, Andrew Breitbart, that politics is downstream from culture. But I say that to say because, what is the connection between, a political fight back and also rebuilding the combativity of the working class? Because that's the other thing that I feel is so absent when we think about sort of the historical scene of opposition to the right is, as you say, the sort of opposition in the workplaces in the streets.
Well, Eugene, you can't build socialism without a society. If you don't have a society, you can't build socialism. Much the same with the political fight back. The working class communities in the global north have suffered from great attrition. The old union halls are gone, the places where workers would come on weekends, where they would hold the weddings of their children. The community of the working class has been damaged in terms of the presence of the institutions. That doesn't mean that the working class doesn't gather on the streets or gather in various other kinds of spaces, religious institutions at the very top of the list. But the culture of the working class has taken a real hit. I mean, you can't have working class culture without robust unions and robust union leadership that understands that unionism isn't just bargaining. Unionism is about building the culture of the working class. I remember when Andy Stern and others decided, well, the way to build union culture was give every union member a purple t-shirt, and that's the culture. No, Andy, that's not how you build trade union culture. You build trade union culture by having picnics, by having gatherings, by having the workers in a neighborhood know each other, trust each other, give each other confidence to come onto the street and fight for their views. You can't have socialism without society. You can't build working class politics without working class culture. It's really, really difficult to do that.
No, I think that's a very good point. And, perhaps if people want to gather and create some culture, they can start by doing a collective reading of dossier number 83 from the Tricontinental Institute, The False Concept of Populism and the Challenges Facing the Left. Fantastic. Great to read with, great to think about. VJ, as always, thank you so much for joining us here on the Freedom Side.
Take care of yourselves.
Mm-hmm. Rania?
Tricontinental Institute. You got to be following it, you guys. Very, very important research coming out of there.
Yeah. No, I agree with that 100%. Well, let's just jump right into our next piece, which is something you know a little bit about, Rania, and that is the ongoing situation in Lebanon as people are also returning to their homes there in southern Lebanon in the context of the so-called ceasefire that was existing between Lebanon and Israel. But to get into all of that, we are very, very honored to be joined here on the show once again by Hala Geber-Leb, who is an award-winning Beirut-based journalist and the author of Hezbollah, Born with a Vengeance. Hala, thank you so much for being back with us.
Hi, thanks for inviting me again, Eugene. Hello, Rania. Good to see you.
Good to
Well,
see
it
you.
is absolutely our pleasure. And I am sort of curious your take on this because, of course, we saw also, I thought, very moving images of people returning to South Lebanon, but we also saw people being targeted by snipers. We see Israel is still bombing Lebanon. So, everyone's sort of talking about it in the context of a ceasefire, and obviously it's not as intense of a war, but it seems that Israel is really not giving up the ghost here, as it were, in their attempts to occupy and terrorize the Lebanese people.
I mean, hi. Good evening, everybody who's listening as well. This is not something new. Israel's history has been flowed with breaking ceasefires. It's not the first time, and I'm sure it won't be the last time. Let me give you an example, Eugene. Over the last 60 days, Israel actually violated the ceasefire 1,350. So that's nearly 22 and a half violations per day in a spate of 60 days. And the so-called committee that was arranged when the ceasefire agreement was signed or agreed upon, headed by an American and then a French and UNIFIL and Lebanese, pretends that it is, calling out the violations sometimes, and yet does nothing. And they do have the power to reign in Israel, but Israel refuses, and they don't dare, do what we've always been saying for the last 15 months, forget Lebanon, even in Gaza, to stop Israel, to force Israel to stop from carrying carnage. Now, Israel's excuse is that it still hasn't, quote unquote, finished cleaning up the areas that it's still occupying. A lot of this is not true, because when we look at what they're actually doing, they're bombing what remains of civilian homes along the main, border envelope with Israel, or the border, and they're trying to ensure that they make it very uninhabitable, just like they did in Gaza, with the wish, or maybe they're hoping that in doing so, they would prevent people from actually coming and living there. They failed to create this buffer zone, which is what they wanted. So now they're trying to make it uninhabitable so that people won't go, and by default, that becomes a buffer zone. That's going to fail, obviously, as you've seen as well over the last few days.
Hala, I saw a statistic today that really stunned me. I think Sifid magazine put it together. Basically, they calculated that Israel has destroyed 7 times more buildings during the ceasefire than during the war itself, which means that 87.5% of the total damage to Lebanon's houses, businesses, and infrastructure was done during the ceasefire, which just shows the violations you're talking about. But also, what does this say about what Israel wants here? It seems obviously they want to create this buffer zone, right? And the whole idea is to create as much destruction as possible so people can't return, because they want a no man's land. Because for Israel, the threat when it comes to the Lebanese is having a population. But then can you talk a bit about what happened on Sunday? Because on Sunday, despite the fact that Israel was shooting at people still went back to their villages. So tell our audience what took place on Sunday and the significance of the fact that Lebanese people did what they did to get back to their houses.
Okay, I mean, we just have to point out something, that there was an agreement. It was for 60 days. There was never a discussion about prolonging, extending, or making it longer. So very late Sunday morning or Saturday night, whichever part of the world you're at, Washington actually, that's the beauty as well. Washington actually announces, not Lebanon, not the main parties in Lebanon, but Washington itself announces that we, as in Washington and obviously Israel, extending till February the 18th. So another 3 weeks. As far as people are concerned, listen, Lebanese have been through wars with Israel, not once, but several times, many times over the years, and big ones over the last sort of decade or 2 decades. And they know what the Israeli intentions are. South Lebanon has been under occupation. There has been a security border imposed in Lebanon before 2000. And all that, didn't work. And the Lebanese were very determined. They know what the Israelis are up to. So they were very determined to go back and reclaim their land. Knowing as well, and that's very important to point out, knowing that the military, as in the Lebanese military, would not be able to do so because the military has not been given permission to fight Israel. It's not been allowed to shoot at Israelis. So what happened on Sunday were the people of these villages and towns, the natives, if you want, the residents, those that belong there, decided, well, we're not waiting for Washington. We don't care, actually. Washington announced, but we haven't agreed. So they decided to go forth and reclaim their own villages. So what they did is a lot of villages that were still part of the, if you want, the occupation, that was still part of, post-ceasefire, Israelis are still there, decided that they will barge in themselves and open the way and force the Israelis to withdraw and allow the military, the Lebanese army, to come in as well and take control of these villages. Because one of the stipulations that it should be that the Lebanese army should control the south. Israel complains that the Lebanese army is not doing anything. Now, the Lebanese army's task is to take over that border, but as long as Israelis are there, they can't actually move in and do so. So we saw on Sunday, yes, some beautiful images, actually, of people that were resilient, of people that are steadfast, of people that are saying, actually, you can sign whatever agreements you want. We've done our bit, and now we're going back to reclaim. And no, Israel is not going to take control of this, whether physically or unphysically. And no matter how destroyed these villages are, we're going back to them because that's where we belong to. So on Sunday, you saw thousands of people. They parked and they start walking in different parts of South Lebanon, different parts of areas, different, and they were doing it slowly. Israel was also shooting and firing bombs at some of the civilians. On Sunday alone, we had 24 people, civilians. And this is the thing. They claim that they never shoot unarmed people. They never attack civilians. They never intentionally kill civilians. Now, on Sunday, it wasn't Hezbollah. It wasn't fighters. It was civilians going back to reclaim their territory, and they were shooting at them, and they killed over 24 people. They killed 24 on Sunday and injured over 100, and it was actually about 144 people. And that was just Sunday. And then you had Monday. People went back again. And on Sunday, people forced the Israelis to withdraw from 12 such villages. And on Monday, they went back again. And on Tuesday, they went back again. And every day now, they will go back and try and force the Israelis to withdraw. So what this shows us is that when you belong on a land, when the land is yours, when you're the native person or people of that land, neither Israel, nor Washington, nor the entire world together will actually force a people to be displaced, which is what we're seeing happening in Gaza. They're trying it in Gaza. They've tried it for 15 months. They turned it into rubble, into uninhabitable city. I mean, I haven't seen anything like this in I don't know when, and forever. And to think that this is happening now in 2024 and 2023 and 2025 is just ridiculous. And the world just sat by and watched. And they were doing that on purpose, to make it so uninhabitable that the Palestinians will not be able to live there afterwards when ceasefires do happen. And the Palestinians did the same thing. You saw them as well in the last few days, walking back, a sea of people walking back to reclaim, to go back to rubble, but that's where they belong. That's where they feel they belong. Now, by contrast, what Israel is upset about, because this just goes to show that Israeli conditions or clauses for this particular war, whether in Lebanon or in Gaza, has actually failed. Don't get me wrong, they've destroyed a lot. It's been costly on both lives and infrastructure. But the Israelis, what they wanted to achieve out of this, Israel failed to achieve. It didn't finish Hezbollah. It didn't finish the Palestinians. It can't create the buffer zone it dreamt of in Lebanon, whereby it will continue to occupy it like it did pre-2000. Now they have to. And the settlers of northern Israel or from our south have not returned, and they're unable to return. And that goes to show there's different people. people who belong and will go back to rubble and set up tents and live, and people who actually don't belong. These settlers don't belong there, and they won't come and fight for it. So, and this is what Netanyahu is struggling with, that, you know, the Southerners are actually pushing back to their villages, and the Israelis have not been able to go back to their areas, or their claimed areas, which are occupied territories anyway. So, yeah, the images are strong. And it's also a message to the Lebanese. If you want to sign agreements without our agreement, because we belong there, not you, you can't do it. We will reclaim our village the way we see fit.
I think that's such an important point to make, and it leads me to my next question here. I mean, a lot of people, I think, around the world are asking, you know, there's a new president, a new prime minister in Lebanon, what to sort of expect in some of the political situation now as we move forward. I'm curious some of your thoughts there.
I mean, yes, you know, you have people in Lebanon also claiming, for example, you know, Rania's heard it, I've heard it a million times over. They say, you know, Iran occupies Lebanon. What we actually saw in the last 15 months, and particularly in the last few months leading up to our new president and prime minister, is actually it's the United States that occupies Lebanon. And I don't mean physically, but the power, it's American. It's Washington. It imposes what it wants on Lebanon. So it decided that the president would be General Michel Aoun, who's, by the way, he's a good guy. You know, I have nothing against him personally. I'm critical at the way he was brought in, just like the prime minister. However, having said that, and to be fair to the guy, he was the commander in chief. He comes from the south himself. He is a nationalist. He will not agree for Israel to stay one extra day in Lebanon. The Americans they appointed him. They suggested him as president for the next phase of Lebanon. But they're assuming also that they can control him and that they can impose on him. So he is also, if you want, stuck between a rock and a hard place. On the one hand, his country is very important to him, and I don't think he will fail. I think one should give him the benefit of the doubt and time to see. But then you have the Americans with the stick above his head as well, because the military at the moment, our Lebanese army, is being funded and trained, and it's surviving because of American support, plus one Gulf country. So I think we will see, you know, the Americans are waiting and we are waiting. Every Lebanese is waiting to see how the new president and the new prime minister, and when he forms his cabinet, how they move forth, in particular with regard to South Lebanon. If they just, for example, at the moment we have a date, February 18th, when Israel should withdraw, okay? What if Israel decides it's not withdrawing on February 18th? The Americans, again, make an announcement on behalf of the Lebanese, on behalf of Israel, that they're extending another month or another 2 weeks or whatever. Then what? Every time this doesn't happen, the Americans are actually weakening the guy that they brought in as president to lead Lebanon to the next phase, instead of allowing him to do what he needs to do in the country, which is reclaim his country, every territory, every inch of it, and be seen by the people on both sides that he is a man for the country first. If the Americans continue to do this, they would actually be weakening him, and there would actually be, I don't know, it's not going to look good for him, and he will lose trust in Lebanon amongst the population, in particular amongst the Shiite population from South Lebanon.
Ala Jebeleb, journalist and author of Hezbollah Born with a Vengeance, based in Beirut. Thank you so much for joining us here on the Freedom Side.
Thank you very much, and I hope to see you soon. Thanks again. Have a good evening.
You too. Rania?
Hala Jebed is a veteran war correspondent. She actually wrote a book about Hezbollah. So people love to call themselves Hezbollah experts.
Yes.
She actually is one.
Not playing one on TV like half of X.
One. Yeah.
Somebody you've never heard of, no real name, no real photo, but they've got a Telegram channel and an X account, and they're telling you they know everything about Hezbollah, Iran, Syria. They just know it all. Funny.
Right.
Well, Rania, I
Exactly.
mean, obviously you're in Lebanon, so since we just talked about it, I didn't want to just randomly move on. I don't know if there's anything that, particularly struck you about that interview or something you just wanted to add or throw in there that you thought were relevant while we're on the topic.
I mean, I think that there's been seismic shifts in this region over the last few months. And so we're in a very interesting and unsettling and unpredictable moment because so much is changing. There's a lot of regrouping taking place. A lot has been lost. So, nobody has a crystal ball. We can just kind of comment and analyze as things happen. And yeah, it's all I can really say right now. It's like, I don't know how things are going to play out. All I know is what's happening right now. I know what the Israelis want. I know what the Lebanese resistance wants. But how it plays out is yet to be seen. And there's just so much has changed in this region. Everybody's still trying to make sense of it, if that makes sense. Sorry, I'm rambling.
Yeah.
But
No, of course. I mean, there's so many different changes, and there's honestly so many different, wild cards. There are things that have not shaped up in other parts of the region that obviously will have a huge impact on Lebanon. I mean, as you know very well, Syria is not like there's a stable foundation there, and we know how we're moving forward. There's so many different variables there. Obviously, what's going on in Palestine, there's still a number of different variables there. I mean, even more broadly, obviously, the countries themselves that are interested in this in the region and in the world, what their position is, which is shaping up. You've got governments changing, different, aspects to the whole thing. So, yeah, no, it's a day-to-day sort of issue, but I do have to say that it was very notable to see, the woman who stood in front of the tank. I saw some young kid who is, standing there flicking off the Israelis, and I think people sometimes see photos like that and they think oh yeah, he's just kind of doing whatever, but they could have just shot and killed him right there, So an element of bravery to show that level of defiance. But I think Hala pointed out, this is not that it's anything new. I mean, I know that. This is many months ago, but we were talking to Asad Abu Khalil on this show, and he was telling us a story of his childhood and being a teenager and having to, be in a tough situation with the Israelis, harassing him and his friends and the potential of being executed right there. So, I think that there's a long history of this kind of resistance. But we can keep talking about this all day, but why don't we just go ahead and move on? We want to move to the new craze, Rania. Cryptocurrency, which is getting bigger and bigger here in the United States, and Donald Trump is very much in the middle of that. I believe Trump Media actually has just released some new crypto thing today. But nonetheless, to help us sort through all of this, we are very, very honored to be joined here on the show by Doug Henwood, the economic journalist, broadcaster, and host of the weekly radio show and podcast Behind the News. Doug, thank you so much for being with us.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Great to have you here. Quote unquote crypto, I don't know exactly which one it is, but I think it was Bitcoin over $105,000 today in terms of value. Jerome Powell, the chairman of the Federal Reserve, saying that, it's all good. Crypto's all good. Banks can deal with it. There's some risks, but, we just need a good regulatory infrastructure. But I have to say, Doug, there's a whole feel to this cryptocurrency thing to me that has kind of an Enron feel to it. This is not like the next innovation in finance, but potentially a pretty dangerous bubble. But I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. Your thoughts?
Well, I would say that when people who are not, familiar with this field have that kind of instinct, you should not lose hold of that instinct. I mean, people get a little knowledge and they say, oh, I'm so sophisticated now. I really understand everything. But sometimes that first impulse is correct. And this is, I notice here, your Chiron here. Is it a scam? Yes, it is a scam. And it's funny, Trump thought that a little while back, but he changed his mind very dramatically for two apparent reasons. One is that somebody made an NFT of him, and he thought that was really exciting and kind of fell in love with it because it's about him. But then second, there's a possibility of money and votes. And all the crypto mavens have showered him with money and attention and flattered him. He's very susceptible to flattery. And so now he's just loading up his administration with crypto heads. It's scary. Yeah, I think it could go. If you just look back at the history of finance, most forms of fictitious capital, as Marx called them, stocks, bonds, or whatever, do have some kind of underlying value. A bond has a stream of interest payments. A stock has a stream of corporate profits and dividends. This is absolutely valueless. There's just no anchor to it at all. I think it's a real innovation in the history of finance in that sense. It's just completely fictitious, invented money. One day, this guy, Satoshi Yamamoto, published a paper and declared that Bitcoin was in existence and endowed it with value, just like God in Genesis. It's a remarkable turn of events. But President, now it has the full power of the U.S. state behind it.
And I'm curious, Doug, if you can elaborate a bit on the danger of that, right? Because the argument goes, if you increase U.S. involvement in crypto, it actually will legitimize a sector that's built on extreme volatility, in many cases fraud, money laundering, rather than actually curbing its risks. So I guess, how do you see this push by Trump to make the U.S., the crypto capital of the planet, playing out in terms of that danger and that it brings us towards for financial instability?
Well, it's funny. I mentioned earlier that Jerome Powell said we need a good regulatory structure. We're not going to have one of those under Trump. We're not going to have any kind of regulatory structure. So we can forget about that. And, it's going to be Elon Musk in charge, turning up everything to 11. And then, he's got David Sachs, who was a partner of one of the PayPal guys, too. It's funny, these two guys are both products of apartheid South Africa, which I think is not an irrelevant fact. But moving on, I think the big danger is that no one really knows these markets, who's behind them, who owns the stuff, who is like barred up to the hilt to buy it. We just don't know. And so when you have that kind of murkiness in the financial structure, you just don't know if it blows up, if it loses value, and it could lose, the history of crypto is that it can lose 20% of its value almost instantly. You just don't know who's going to get exposed. That famous comment from Warren Buffett many years ago, that when the tide goes out, you find out who's been swimming without trunks. I think that crypto has that risk at a very, very large scale. We just don't know. Most of the evidence is that these markets are very concentrated in a few hands and very manipulable. And that seems very, very dangerous, especially Trump is talking about creating some kind of sovereign wealth fund based on crypto or something. It's completely insane, but we're just all going whole hog into this insane world.
No, a good point about South Africa. Peter Thiel, I also just recently learned, apparently from South Africa, also part of the PayPal mafia.
He spent some time there as a kid. He's, I think, originally German and passed through South Africa. But I think, they all bear that stamp.
Yeah, no, they really do.
But it's also, it's the mining and the interest in gold, too. It's this weird, obsession with these different forms of money. They all think that state money is bad. They're good libertarians. They want to get around the state, so they hope that crypto can help them get around the state. But it's also a way for these people to avoid taxes, to avoid any kind of scrutiny. And we just, we really just don't know who owns this stuff or where it's going or what could happen. The thing is just rife with fraud over the years. People have do these what they call rug pulls, where they think you're going to get some money and it turns out you don't get any, and it just all disappears. And we could be seeing that in an extremely large scale. We just don't know, and there's no way that they're going to allow the Federal Reserve to for all the problems of the Federal Reserve, it really is a very class-bound institution, but it is one of the few remaining institutions in this country that is actually competent at what it does. Everything else seems to be falling apart. The Federal Reserve is still more or less competent at what it does, which is why I think that Musk and Sachs et al. Just want to keep the Fed's nose out of this stuff. It's going to be interesting to watch Trump fighting with Jay Powell in the coming months, too. It's going to be, we all remember the first Trump administration, which was just one adventure after another. The second Trump administration seems to be even more bizarre and more fast-paced and just more surreal.
This is a little off topic, but since we mentioned Elon Musk a couple of times, one of the things I'm curious about, given the what you make of this, his influence with Trump, is this obsessive, constant mentioning by Elon Musk of Milton Friedman and the importance of Milton Friedman, how we have to keep following Milton Friedman, and so on and so forth. I'm wondering what you make of that in terms of what potential impact it could have, since we know that Elon Musk has the ear of Trump.
Well, I think what these people mean, Milton Friedman, they mean let capitalists do whatever they want to, with no scrutiny, with no regulation by government, no taxes, just let us do our thing and keep our money and shut up. That's basically what he means by Milton Friedman. I really doubt that Elon Musk has read much Milton Friedman. A lot of people who criticize Milton Friedman haven't read much of him either. But I almost feel bad for him, because he was, right wing, but a serious person. And he is being, adopted by all these maniacs like Musk in his writings. But it basically just means let us do whatever we want to and, screw everything else.
You know what? Sorry, to go back to the idea of crypto. I mean, it just seems like this kind of end stage capitalism situation where you're actually looking like
That's always
to fake
optimistic,
money.
right?
I mean, end stage look, end stage can be very bad. Like
Yes,
it's like
yes.
I just
And it can go on a
it's
long
just
time.
I'm not trying. It's like I don't say that like in an optimistic way of like, yay, capitalism's ending. I'm just saying it's like gone to this doomed point where now it's like money's already fake. We give it value, right? But like to have this money you can't even see or hold or like and have it be this weird thing that makes no sense to most people is just so wild. But there's this other aspect of crypto where it's like to have it exist and to mine it requires like all this like energy, like a really crazy amount of energy where it actually like hurts the environment, which is not something I knew that much about. But like there's so many downsides to this to the point where like it's actually causing pollution that also doesn't even get talked about. Like it's just completely doomed culture, Doug. Doomed culture. But I'm just curious if you can speak to that.
I completely agree with you there. The classic definition of money, it's got three parts. It's a unit of exchange, means you could buy and sell stuff with it. A unit of account, which means that people keep their books in it. Businesses and households keep their books in it. And a store of value. Okay, it fails utterly on the first two counts. As a store of value, you don't want to keep your funds in something that moves, unless you're speculating. But if you have savings or something, you don't want to keep it in an asset that can fluctuate 20% in a day. So it fails as anything like a classic definition of money. And then you're right, the ecological consequences of this are just insane. It takes an enormous amount of energy to mine these things. It's funny how they use mine as if it were a precious metal. But on top of that, there's a very strong overlap between people who love crypto and who love AI, another completely frightening technological innovation that also requires immense amounts of energy, and they're a real threat to the climate. And Trump is talking about declaring some kind of national energy emergency just to fund the expansion of power generation with what he called it the other day, clean, beautiful coal, which is just psychotic. So it's just, it is a completely phantasmic form of money. But then that requires, people think it's immaterial, but it requires this enormous material infrastructure of servers and electricity and transmissions mechanisms. So it is in essence extremely material and very damaging in its material dimensions. But it does give rise to this consciousness of immateriality, which is also, I think, very damaging, very alienating, and bizarre. So it really does feel surreal, like a drug experience, but not a very pleasant one.
Well, and it reminds, in a way, like there's, to use the phrase maybe kind of loosely, it seems like it has such an antisocial character. I mean, it makes me reflect a little bit on the role of the crypto industry in the election, where, they were in this sort of unholy alliance with the Zionist lobby targeting members of the Squad, Jamal Bowman, Cori Bush, people who had actually never really said that much about crypto. So it seemed relatively obvious to me that to them, it was as much about people who potentially could be against them as opposed to people who had some sort of anti-crypto front in Congress, which in and of itself seems to speak to sort of the nefariousness of it.
Oh, yeah, I agree with the political affiliations of most crypto enthusiasts are pretty dark. They're very reactionary, very much in alliance with Hayek. You mentioned Friedman, but I think there's something more Hayekian about it in this belief, this attempt to wall off the economic realm from any kind of political influence. And Hayek himself believed that there should be competition in monies. So you could always have the hardest money, which means austere, deflationary kinds of influences. So that is a lot of the underlying political logic. It's also deeply libertarian, individualistic, and as you say, antisocial. Marx said a man carries his bond with society in his pocket. Money is really fundamentally a very social thing. It may feel, very detached and abstract, but at its base, it is a social thing. It's like it represents people are hooked together by market relations, whole networks of production and distribution that money ties into. Crypto doesn't even engage in any meaningful way with that things on that kind of social level. It is just this weird asset that people fetishize. It's just pure fetish value with nothing at all, no other dimension to it than that. I think there are a lot of people who want to use it to escape taxes. There are people who want to do it to hire hitmen. or buy drugs or any kinds of other things. Yeah, it's just the broad phenomenon of crypto just seems deeply antisocial. A lot of people have said it's a solution to something that isn't really a problem. And the only problem it's really a solution of is how can I move large amounts of money secretly so governments can't track me? And I think that really is an important part of its charm. But then the rest of it's just this real pure ideological value of people, and the gee whiz, oh, isn't tech cool kind of thing that all these tech nerds around Trump love too. And you also look at the people around it. People around Trump now are constituting a new kind of I don't know, subset of the ruling class, a new elite, these tech bros driven, extremely rich, with extremely reactionary politics, with basically substantial state power right now. And I find it very frightening and antisocial. And the climate, the damage to the climate that this produces is not really that much separate from everything else. That too is antisocial. The whole enterprise is deeply antisocial.
Well, it's been an honor to have you with us here, Doug Hinwood. Hopefully everyone is checking out Behind the News on a weekly basis. Thank you again for giving us some of your time here in the Freedom Side.
Oh, anytime. Happy to do it. Thanks.
Rania?
Well, I don't know about you, Eugene, but I am ready to take all my money out of the bank and put it into crypto after everything I just heard.
Yeah, listen, it'll be you and the president of El Salvador, and then when it's all they've actually bought more recently.
Unfreaking believable.
It really is.
Jesus Christ. What
really
world
is.
do we live in? I don't even know.
Good question. Certainly one that a lot of people are asking about a lot of stories. And our next story is another harrowing one, and that is the ongoing conflict happening in the Congo, which is flaring in many different ways. And we are very, very honored and grateful for Kambale Musavuli joining us once again here on the show. He's an analyst with the Center for the Research on Congo Kinshasa. Kambale, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Well, it's great to have you with us. I mean, obviously there's fighting going on in the eastern DRC. The main city, or one of the main cities of Goma, has become, well, a lot of rumors of it falling, not falling, fighting going on around that. And at the same time in Kinshasa, huge protest, from people coming out there. Bukavu, which is the other side of the lake from Goma, large protests. I mean, give us a sense of where things are now. I mean, it really does feel like there's a certain inflection point being reached in the conflict here.
The city of Goma today actively under the country defense force and their allies in the Congo, the M23 rebel militia groups. And it's quite taxing for Congolese to even discuss myself, because we are people in the city of Goma. And some of our who are in Goma, things that we're hearing, they have not had water, they have not had energy, they don't have access to food. Week. Imagine being in your home for a week without any food, wondering when you're going to go out. And as they're going out now, at least from those I spoke with today, it's quite gruesome in the streets, because it took place inside the city. So dead bodies not yet been collected, and people are facing the harsh reality of all that. Now, what is going on? Proxy rebel militia called M23, backed by Rwanda, equipped, financed, and trained Rwandan military, that decided to take over a city of 2 million people, which is the capital of the province of North. North Kivu is a province rich of minerals. The largest coltan reserve in the world is in North Kivu, in the city of Rubaya, the Rubaya mine. And coltan is a mineral that's used in your electronic devices, phones, your laptops, your printers, your drones, even your nuclear reactor uses coltan. And so by the rebels taking over the city of the province, it's almost as claiming victory. And they have already indicated that going now toward Bukavu, which is the capital city of another province, also rich of that's South Kivu, so just right south of Kivu. And of course, they're hinting that they are going to go toward Kinshasa. And they have things that they are presenting, right? They say they're fighting for a minority Tutsi, They are saying they are fighting for, if they're fighting against corruption in the country, but those are swings. No, their actions doesn't show that this is what they actually don't show that this is what they're actually fighting for. If you go into the mine, you're not fighting for a minority group, you're making money. The UN group of experts published a report showing the operations, right, where in the last UN reports in December, that document the M23 rebels make $8,000 a month on illegal taxation at the mine, right? So imagine how long they've had all of this mine. They've made millions of dollars already from this mine. So making money fighting for the people or group. Then in contrast, what you pointed out, there have been protests in the capital city of Kinshasa. And it's very important to really understand this protest. It's not just Kinshasa. In many cities across the Congo, there were protests. In Butembo, there were protests. In Bukavu, there was one of the biggest protests. And then in the capital city, there were protests. So protesters went to the Rwandan embassy, looted, destroyed completely. They also went to the Uganda and did the same. But they did something that has been on the past 2 years. They understand that Rwanda and Uganda are the African forces affecting the Congo, but they also understand that these cannot do it. So protesters went to the US embassy, to the French, to the Belgian embassy, actually protests that burned the tires. I think the French embassy's wall was burned. Protesters were interviewed when they spoke. They claimed this war is being by the Americans. The Americans are the ones who support. And of course, to make the matter worse, when you go to the U.S. embassy website in Kinshasa, right, the U.S. embassy in the DRC, they've put level 4 for U.S. citizens, and the level 4 they put it on their website. Do not travel to the Congo. And when you read the press, they are asking Americans to leave. That look like someone guilty about something, right? When you start closing your embassy and asking your citizens to leave, what is it that you are doing in the country? So the population is clear of the imperialist forces supporting the rebels in DRC. And last, the president of the Congo, the Congolese people, 2 days after the taking over of the city, we all were waiting for much more clear direction about what the Congo will do. What we heard in that speech was warning to the international community for their silence, asking Congolese to hold the Congolese armed support our troops, and say that a neighboring country has attacked us, so we might be invaders. It seemed quite weak in his speech that every Congolese is wondering about what is happening with the president of the Congo. But it's something that was predictable. It's not been elected by the Congolese people. 2018 elections were with a lot of irregularities. We know that when that is being imposed on the Congolese, it took actions where the violence in the east very seriously. So this is where we are. Still goes out to the people who speak, and I hope is much different. That more people are paying attention to the situation in the Congo, take action for African agents accountable, as well as the Western leaders, who pay packets accountable as well.
Kambale, we're having a few connection issues. We're going to take you off briefly and just see if we can work this one out, and then try to come back to you as well. Appreciate you being here with us. Obviously, a critical issue, and I think some of the points that were made there, the UN experts report saying about how some of these rebel groups, including M23, it's backed by Rwanda, making $80,000 I think a day off of some of these mines that they were able to take over, and the goal of this conflict and it really being over control of Congo's mineral resources, despite the various different other things that are being placed there. Who's going to control this great wealth that is flowing out? And I think the summary of the point he was making about the protests in Kinshasa and around the country, but especially Kinshasa, because you saw, the U.S., the French, the Belgian, the Japanese embassy, people recognizing that it's these international powers that have enabled this looting of the Congo for decades and decades now, with their proxy forces, Rwanda and Uganda in the region playing a key role. And, to some degree, this sort of instability and inability of the country to really consolidate its foundation, I think is so key to understand. Like, it's not by accident that there's all this war and all this chaos. It's not something random. I think we're seeing more and more Congolese people speak directly to that issue. I think we have Kambale back here. Excellent.
There.
Kambale,
Yeah.
welcome back. Okay, well, Rania, I think you were about to jump in, so I will.
Thank you. Oh, I thought you froze for a second, Eugene, because you didn't finish your sentence.
Sorry. I should. I don't.
I was like, not again. So, Kambale, I know we've already discussed this, but I think it's worth explaining each time, because when Congo gets covered in the mainstream media, a lot of this is left out. So what does Rwanda have to gain from all of this? Why is Rwanda so heavily involved to this degree in trying to take over this area?
Rwanda is the Israel of Africa. I will continue to say that. The same role Israel plays in the Middle East is the same role Rwanda plays in Central Africa, right? Rwanda is the satellite agent of the United States in Africa. So what do they do exactly? Rwandan soldiers receive a lot of military support from the United States, the United Kingdom, and European nations, particularly even the European Union, to serve their interests across the world. This is why you see you had Rwandan troops in Haiti, you had Rwandan troops in Mali, in Central African Republic, and just lately, Rwandan troops have been in Mozambique, fighting the so-called ISIS. But when you ask the people of Mozambique, we know that they are protecting oil interests there, particularly the interests of Total Energy, which is a French oil company. So that's one. The second interest is that they are also Rwanda is also the conduit of Congo's minerals, right? So you can come to the Congolese and say, I want the gold, I want the coltan, right? And pay the fair share, and pay the tax, whatever you have to do. But it's much cheaper to do it through Rwanda. So I'll give a simple example again. So this is something very concrete. The European Union last year signed a critical minerals agreement with Rwanda. And what are critical minerals? It's your lithium, it's your cobalt, it's your coltan, right? The minerals needed for the fourth industrial revolution, for this green revolution, and so on, right? So the European Union is signing that agreement with Rwanda, knowing very well that they don't have these minerals in Rwanda. And then when you read the UN report, you see the documentation of rebel groups exploiting the minerals in Congolese mines and sending it across Rwanda, right? So Congo's minerals are being sold at wholesale in Rwanda when they don't have the reserve to actually say that these are Rwandan minerals. So that's the second interest of Rwanda is the Congo's minerals. The third one is the land. Congo has a lot of land, a lot of arable land, and Rwanda, for the past 3 decades, has shown interest in taking control of some of the land in the DRC, pretty much occupying it. And they've done that multiple times. And they try to use the rationale of the Berlin Conference, changing the lines. This used to belong to us, and it's no longer part of us. Of course, we can go into history books, have long debates about the narrative, how it doesn't hold. But our appeal is for progressive forces, right? And as well as Pan-Africanists. When you hear someone who wants to carve a country smaller and smaller, that person is not a Pan-Africanist. The best idea would be to say that Congo, Rwanda, Uganda will continue to become black, to become a bigger entity to achieve the Pan-African dream. So anyone who's fighting to continue to carve up the African continent to have smaller country, has no Pan-African interest or is not interested in Pan-African unity and stability on the African continent. So those are the three that I can put out there. But we cannot only talk about Rwanda, right? Rwanda does not operate alone. Rwanda operates as well with Uganda. For example, the M23 rebels, when they started their attacks in 2021, they actually came to Uganda. The town that they occupied for 2 years, Bunagana, is a town at the border of Uganda. What does that mean? That Uganda allows the M23 to cross its borders anytime they want to, and even hold meetings inside Rwanda. It's not me saying that. It's in the UN Group of Experts report saying that the Ugandan military has provided weapons to the M23, but not only that, they've also provided safe passage and logistical support to the M23. So anytime you speak about Rwanda, you have to also speak about Uganda. And these two countries have been US allies on the so-called war on terror. They continue to get taxpayers' money, fueling and funding the Rwandan military and the Ugandan military.
One thing I want to ask you, Kambale, and this I think is relevant, and we talked earlier about the protest, is what does this potentiality open up, do you think, for popular struggle to address some of the issues in the country? I mean, I know that there are, of course, some people who are supporting the president who are out there protesting, but the way it's sort of presented by his partisans is, these are kind of all his supporters. Seems like what really people are supporting is a national fight to unify the country. And I mean, I know we saw in the election, Denis Mukwege had some youth energy behind him. We see the popular movement has been continuing to struggle. I mean, do you think that these big protests we're seeing in Kinshasa and around the country could also be an interesting opening for popular politics in the Congo to also reassert itself in the political conversation?
The people who support the president are really a minority. People have more a national support to the Congolese soldiers in the war of aggression that we are facing, and people are in support of bringing about peace and stability. And as they do that, sometimes it's conflated with support of the government. Congolese people are very clear. Now, I watched an interview of a Congolese protester today, actually, who said the Congolese president went on TV asking us to join the military. But this is the same government that kept the Rwandan embassy open up until this week. For the past 2 years, they've been saying Rwanda is invading. But why did they keep the embassy of Rwanda open up until now? And clearly stated that the Congolese government is complicit. So the people are very clear about their interests, right? The people know that the Congolese government is guilty, but they also know that they must also fight for their freedom. It does create an opening for organizing. Progressive forces in DRC is embryonic. Like-minded are connecting to build a new Congo. But their appeal is to the international community. Their appeal is still, they want to see more and more people clear about the conflict in the Congo. They want to be able to say that from Nigeria to South Africa, people have united for the Congo. And this is why I'm very happy now to see that a Nigerian artist, Thames, has decided to cancel a concert in Kigali in solidarity with the Congolese. And the more we have that, it creates that new movement, similar to the anti-apartheid movement, where people will boycott Rwanda until there is peace and stability in the Congo, until the troops leave the DRC. It's similar also to the Palestinian movement, where people are also boycotting, divesting, and sanctioning Israel. And we hope the same can be true also for DRC, and we get more support on that front.
Mm-hmm. Well, and let me just ask you this quickly before we let you go here, and we already sort of mentioned it obliquely, but I want to just touch it directly, especially because there's a lot of forces active on the internet talking about this now. The claim by Rwanda and M23 as well that the real issue is the FDLR, which is the sort of Hutu proxies that committed the genocide in Rwanda, that they're actually being harbored by Congo. And this is really just self-protection by the people of Rwanda. And that's, one of the main arguments that I often see put out here for why this is justified. And I wonder how you respond to that. I mean, I know there's a lot to that, but, I think it's an important piece.
Indeed. I mean, the first thing that came into my head was, do you condemn Hamas, right? That's the same analogy. I mean, of course, FDLR is nothing closer to Hamas. They don't have the same struggle. The FDLR do have combatants in it. Commanders who participated in the Rwandan genocide that should be held accountable. But let's be very frank. When we look at the FDLR in DRC, we need to know how many they are, right? So if you're going after a force, we want the Rwandan government to let us know, is it 1,000, is it 4,000, is it 10,000, right? The numbers that we know is close to about 1 to 3,000, and maybe those who participated may be in the hundreds, right? So we know who they are. But who are they? They are Hutu citizens, right? So if we are talking about Rwandan Hutu in DRC, what is the solution for them to stop their fight? Should they go back to Rwanda? If so, why is that a Congolese problem? Because Congo didn't go to Rwanda to bring the Hutu combatants and the Hutu genocidaire and the Hutu combatant into DRC. They came from somewhere, right? And I'm posing this question to contrast something that's very interesting. Most media do not do that, right? They will talk about the M23. They will explain how the claim makes sense. They will ask the Congolese government to negotiate with the M23. But how come we never ask Rwanda to negotiate with the FDLR if they are Rwandan citizens? That's one, you know that there is no interest to deal with the issue. Secondly, Rwanda has occupied the Congo in the past decade many times. At one point, they even had control of the Congolese government, right? Congo is a country the size of Western Europe. So they moved from the east of Congo all the way to the capital city in the west. They took over the capital city of Kinshasa. Somehow, when they took over the capital city of Kinshasa, they didn't see the FDLR, right? So through all the military operations, how come we do not solve the FDLR problem? So we know it's a pretext, right? The long-term solution for the FDLR is that the Rwandan government must negotiate the safe return of their own citizens into the country. If they believe that they are a threat, there are mechanisms to do that. But no one is actually pushing them to do so. So that's what I could submit as it relates to the FDLR and the bogus claim that it's a threat, right? Mm-hmm. And as I said before, if the FDLR is a threat, how come they always go to the mine in DRC when they are saying that they're in the Congo for the FDLR? Those two things are not compatible. So it is a true excuse. That's why I always say that when we talk about the FDLR, it's like, do you condemn Hamas? Because it's the eternal excuse of saying why Rwanda should be there. And there are mechanisms that can deal with the FDLR. But to be very frank, we really need to know what is the situation in Goma, what's the situation in the Congo. We have Rwandan Defense Force using L-based systems weapon in DRC, right? And the UN group of experts is showing us the picture. We have the M23 with the SHORAD system in DRC. As I always say, you don't buy this Walmart and bring it to the DRC. How can they have this sophisticated weapon? And the taking over of Goma, according to Africa intelligence, right, was done with assault drones. Where did the M23 get assault drone? And in the process of the M23 taking over, 14 South African soldiers were killed on the battlefield, which is creating now a possibility of a regional war where South Africa, at least every indication I see now, South Africa is going to be militarily engaged in bringing about peace and stability. And on social media, Paul Kagame is threatening an African president on his social media account on X. Actually, I saw that. So you see how an action of just taking over the capital city is involving now more and more countries, and stability is not there. The people of Goma They want to have access to water. They want to have access to electricity. They want to have access to food. They want to continue to lead their normal lives. It will not happen if we do not say bluntly that Rwandan Defense Forces are the one behind the M23, using weapons provided to them by U.S. taxpayers' money, British taxpayers' money, European Union taxpayers' money. And the way you stop that is mobilizing people in those countries, telling them that you should ask your government, demand for your government to stop using your tax money to support oppressive regimes on the African continent.
Mm-hmm. Well, I appreciate that, Kambale. I appreciate you sticking with us. I appreciate you joining 2 weeks in a row. A very important story. We'll continue to follow it. You are an analyst with the Center for Research on Congo Kinshasa. Kambale Musavuli, thank you so much for your time here in the Freedom Side.
Thank you.
Rania?
Eugene, I'm glad that we have someone like Kambale we can talk to about this stuff, who's incredibly knowledgeable, because really, like, I know I always say this with Africa-related stories, but my God, the way the media covers these issues is so outrageous and racist,
yeah,
and lacking any context or nuance whatsoever.
No, that's
just
100%
barbaric
true.
African people are killing each other because that's what they do, and it's really sad. It's just so sad. The Congo is just so sad. That's it. No context, no historical context, no present day context, no the role of imperialism context. It's just completely outrageous.
Mm-hmm. No, it's true. Well, I'm not going to get started on that one because then we'll be here all night. But we have one more story to get to before we leave, and that is Colombia. The Colombia climb down, I'm calling it. Oh, look at that. Very happy to be joined to discuss the row between the U.S. and Colombia, President Petro, and some of everything around that by Zoe Alexandra, the journalist and editor of People's Dispatch, back with us here. Zoe, thanks so much for being with us. Thanks so much for having me. Well, it's an honor to have you as always. A bit of whiplash in Colombia several days ago. There's a whole context to it, but of course there was a video that came out of Brazilian migrants being returned by the United States. The conditions were obviously, not conditions that humans should really be transported in. They're obviously being treated poorly. So the Colombian president comes out, says, we're not going to accept our migrants until they're in a more sort of regularized flight. There's, this huge issue, and Trump threatens them. Petro says we're going to fight back. And then several hours later, he totally backs down. I mean, I don't know. Give us some context as to what happened here.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good surface recap, and I think it was a very intense day. This happened on Sunday. The flight of the Brazilian deportees happened on Friday night, and just to get a little bit more context on that, there were Brazilian migrants who were being deported on U.S. military planes. And they made a technical stopover in Manaus, which is in the north of the country, earlier than they were supposed to. And when Brazilian authorities saw them coming off the plane in the conditions that they were in, which was handcuffed and had their feet also, linked together, they didn't, there were videos circulating, but the Brazilian authorities also essentially took custody of them and said, we'll take it from here. We're going to fly them the rest of the way to Belo Horizonte, which is the city in the southern central part of Brazil. And the Brazilian government had sent a note to Secretary of State, sent a note to the White House, basically protesting this treatment. And again, kind of we see that a lot of these deportation flights are part of agreements that are made through the U.S. government with these countries, because of course, in order to fly into another country's airspace, you have to have an agreement with the country. So they said, we want to kind of revisit the terms of this agreement given this treatment. And Petro says late on Saturday night, early Sunday, essentially he doesn't specifically reference Brazil, but I think from the context we can tell, having seen this, we won't accept it. As you said, Trump not immediately retaliates. He actually waited until the afternoon of Sunday, retaliates with a threat to impose 25% tariffs on Colombia, which would increase to 50%, and suspend visas for all members of the Petro government, as well as kind of vaguely referencing supporters and parties. Arguably we might be referring there to parties that are part of his coalition. And again, this really sent a shockwave. Interesting points to note there is that Colombia actually has a free trade agreement with the United States, which again is a point of contention for the left. But many people in Colombia were using this to say, how can you increase tariffs on us when we have this agreement? We've had this agreement for over a decade. That was one point. And so when this sort of tit for tat, threat to threat thing sort of escalated, this was all again happening on social media. So Petro had made a statement on social media. Donald Trump responded on Truth Social. Petro responds on Twitter. And so after that, there's sort of silence. And it becomes clear, of course, that obviously there's going to be diplomatic discussions which actually address this to be able to kind of get out of this impasse. And what it seems like is that the foreign minister was traveled to Washington, and they did have this kind of set of discussions, initial discussions about what was going to happen with these specific flights. And then both the White House and the Foreign Ministry of Colombia essentially announced that they had resolved the issue. Trump, in his statement, essentially claimed victory and said that Colombia has agreed to every single condition that I put forward. And we saw 2 days later that this was not exactly true. So in some, he made it seem like Petro completely caved, but Petro's government in their statement, again, I know this is a very kind of back and forth situation, but this is really how it went down. It was a back and forth between these two governments. In this statement of the Petro government, they said, no, we were able to achieve these dignified conditions. And it's true that 2 days later, on Tuesday, flights arrived to Colombia that were flown by the Colombian Air Force. The people who were being deported were not wearing handcuffs. In different interviews, people expressed that they had been given better treatment after the intervention of the Colombian government. But I think what's important to point out here is that, what does this mean for the flights going forward? Are they all going to be, there weren't that many details that have been released so far, so we don't know, is the Colombian Air Force going to be flying all of the deportation flights? There's several flights a week. What does this mean for the other countries? Are all of the immigrants going to be receiving the treatment that we saw that happened to the Brazilians? There was a news article in Ecuador that some migrants had denounced that they had essentially been handcuffed the entire flight, and then 20 minutes before landing, they took the handcuffs off. So it's a really difficult thing, because these countries do have to receive these migrants, of course. Where else are they going to go if they're already being detained? The most humane solution is that they arrive home safely. But what these leaders are saying is that it must be in dignified conditions.
So Zoe, Gustavo Petro's response was, quite bold and brave. And I'm just wondering, given Trump's ongoing attacks against leaders of Latin America, saying he wants to take back the Panama Canal. He made some threats towards Mexico, the way he acted with the Brazilians, the way he acted with the Colombians. What has been the response regionally so far? Because after what happened with Gustavo Petro and Trump, there did seem to be some call, I think it was by the president of Honduras, called for like a meeting of CELAC. So I'm just curious, what's the progressive government response so far to Donald Trump? Could we be seeing perhaps a unifying moment in Latin America because of Trump's aggression?
Yeah, well, today the CELAC meeting was supposed to be held. It was postponed or canceled. So we don't really know what is going to happen next with that. But immediately after the Petro Trump rebuttal, there was an outpouring of support for the Colombian government, and kind of this, reiterating this stand of dignity that Petro was trying to take. This is going to be a constant point of contention over the next couple of years. There's so many different elements to this. Not only are migrants, Latin American migrants, being vilified in the media, there's so much hate speech directed at migrants, not only by elected officials, but also, again, in mainstream media. So they're not only being kind of like stigmatized in this huge way, they're being criminalized, they're being arrested, they're being deported, but also, again, the impact that this will have on Latin America does not end there. It's not just about what happens in the United States and this horrific and dehumanizing treatment that migrants face, but also how is this going to impact Latin American countries that are going to be receiving, tens of thousands of migrants in some cases, if Donald Trump is actually making good on his word to deport, 10 million people, these countries, which are already suffering under the boot of US imperialism, are already dealing with structural issues because of neoliberal policies, because of debt. And now they're going to receive all of these people who are, of course, unemployed, left their countries in the first place because of this economic misery. And then another impact that these countries are going to face is, for example, the remittances that are sent. Mexico last year recorded a record level of remittances that were sent back to Mexico. This, in the Central American countries, makes up a large part of their economies. So this is going to really be a huge impact on them, on how they deal with, of course, the migrant population that's being deported to them, and then their economies. So, they're taking stands in terms of defending their compatriots, their countrymen that are in the United States and facing this mistreatment. Once again, saying that Trump, the era of the Monroe Doctrine is over. This is a united Latin America that's going to stand up to the US and US imperialism. But again, also kind of grappling with the impact that these deportations will have in their home countries. We know that Mexico has proposed kind of a comprehensive plan to receive migrants. They have shelters that they've set up and reintegration programs. But, Mexico is, of course, it's one of the largest migrant populations in the United States. And they have been very clear that this will largely impact their country. But in other countries, has the infrastructure been developed yet? What impact will this have? Again, this is a problem, and this is an issue that goes beyond the borders of the United States.
Yeah. No, an important issue, and there's a lot there and a lot to be said, and this is one of the many reasons why we appreciate People's Dispatch, because you're covering it all in all the countries all the time. A lot to be here. We'll continue to follow this story. Zoe, we really appreciate you sticking with us and joining us here once again on the Freedom Side.
Thanks so much for having me.
Mm-hmm. Rania?
Well, I look forward to seeing Latin America's response to what is sure to be ongoing efforts at, creating instability and just being a bully. Like what Trump did was it was like the personification of the worst tendencies of American empire in the trashiest way possible. Yes.
Couldn't put it better than that. Well, that brings us to the end of our show once again here today. Of course, shout out to all of our guests and everyone who joined. Really appreciate that. Before we get out of here, Rania, anything you want our viewers to know?
Yes, there is, Eugene. I want to remind our viewers to smash that like button. It helps boost us in the algorithm.
That like button.
Woo! Eugene, you know what? Yes. Thank you. I appreciate that encouragement because I don't get it from Eugene. But also, I want to remind our viewers and listeners to support Breakthrough News if you're able to by going to patreon.com/Breakthrough News. For as little as $5 a month, you can access exclusive content as well as exclusive merch. And most importantly, you can be a supporter of independent media that is bringing you the truth while the corporate media lies you into war, lies you into privatization, and lies you into just end stage capitalism and doom. So, wow, that got really dark. Wow. Anyways, support Breakthrough News, patreon.com/Breakthrough News.
For Breakthrough News and keep us out of hospice care, I guess. Nonetheless, for myself, for Rania, for our whole Breakthrough News team, shout out to everyone who watched. Shout out to all of our patrons. Of course, as I already mentioned, shout out to all our guests. We will see you next time.
gets in its way.